Welcome, everybody. You are listening to the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for being with us. It's a real pleasure to have you joining for this conversation. And in fact, it's a conversation where we're going to talk about characteristics like trust, communication, connection, tying into some recent episodes we've had here on a variety of those topics. So I think it'll be a nice through line for listeners, give you some opportunities to reflect back on previous conversations, to think about some of those ideas in a new context here with my guest, Dr. Rachel Edoho-Eket. She has earned a reputation as a strong instructional leader, passionate educational advocate, and dedicated mentor. As the principal of a national Blue Ribbon school in Maryland, Rachel is a lifelong learner who strives for excellence not only for herself, but also for everyone she serves. She is currently president of the Maryland Association of Elementary School Principals and is an ASCD faculty member. Her book, which she co-authored with Dr. Brad Johnson, is called Relational Intelligence, the Key Factor to Exceptional School Leadership. That's what we're talking about today. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ross, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Yeah, and what better place to start than the title of the book today, that term relational intelligence, RQ, which is what it's all about. Might be a new idea to a lot of listeners. Would love to start with defining what is RQ and specifically how it is different from EQ, I think, because that's what it might be most closely compared to, that emotional intelligence, but there are some specific contrasts that are important to understand.
Yes, so relational intelligence is similar to IQ and EQ, like you mentioned, but it does have a specific focus on how we understand and manage relationships effectively to really create environments where people want to work together and be productive. That's really the difference. EQ really looks at how we see ourselves and how we interpret others around us, and RQ really looks at how we use that knowledge to support the people around us, how we look at the interrelationships between people and helping everyone to reach their goals together.
Yeah, it strikes me as a really an interesting complement, right? Those things to go together, like putting a lot of those insights into action, like
Mhm.
understanding people and being able to relate to them, but then being able to take relating to relationship and actually be fostering that, determining how to make it work for you. You write about that it's building trust, communicating with empathy, connecting authentically, right? And it is true when you really think about it. I think those are things that one might associate with emotional intelligence, and yet it's not necessarily so, right? That there certainly could be people that have a high degree of EQ, but aren't effective at each of these things, at fostering connection with that. So it is a good framework, I guess, for
Mhm.
thinking about it, especially in terms of leadership and translating your understanding of those around you too. You need to show that,
Yeah.
communicate that. We'll get to the communication piece, but such a critical part of leadership that it's especially in an environment where there's a lot of pressure, stress, a lot of demands, and a lot of reasons to be skeptical of at least the title of
Mhm.
principal or leader, right? And
Mhm.
folks who have had experiences with leaders who maybe were not as effective at these, that being successful at demonstrating that and making connecting in those bridges is a real key objective.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up because we've all worked with lots of different leaders over our careers. Both, when I was a child, I had different principals, and then all the way up through becoming a classroom teacher and then becoming a principal myself. So, working with lots of different administrators, what I have found throughout my career is that the principals who had really strong relational intelligence were the ones who were the most successful in terms of teacher recruitment and retention. And we know that those are two big issues that we have right now in the world of education. There's not a large pipeline of teachers. So now more than ever, it's important that school administrators have the RQ skill set so that we can not only get great people into our buildings and into our schools, but keep them there, keep the morale high. One of the things that Brad and I talk about is the importance of having those stable schools. When we have a stable school, we have better academic outcomes for the community and for the students. When you have high turnover, that destabilizes schools. So, our work with RQ is extremely important and something that we want all school leaders to be able to master.
How did you zero in on this as the defining trait of school leaders? It was a lot of that through experience, through being able to compare situations in which a leader had a high RQ, others where they didn't, other ways of investigating. How did you kind of determine like this is the thing?
Yeah, well, we were thinking about this for a while years ago, and there is research around IQ, EQ, all those things, and there is growing research around RQ itself. But really, fundamentally, if I think about the people who've made an impact on my life, if I think about the teachers who've made an impact on my life, the mentors, all of them had a distinguishing quality, and it is the way that they interacted with people. It is the way that you trusted them. It is the way that they poured into you. And not everyone has that quality, but the good news is everyone can learn that, right? So it may not be second nature to people, but that's where I think our book fills that void. Most of us are credentialed, right? If you are an administrator, you're credentialed. You've gone to school, you've gone through the programming, you understand the nuts and bolts of the job. But what we are saying is RQ takes it a step further. So it's a difference between getting compliance from people and actually having people wanting to come to work, wanting to be a partner with you in your leadership, and working together so that we can have the best schools possible for our students. So we really did zero in on RQ as that defining characteristic because most school leaders have been trained in the basic and general way, but we know the difference between a good leader and a great leader. And that's what we want everyone. We're all striving to be great leaders. So that's where our book is very informative and helpful.
Excellent. I'd love to talk about previewed the three core pillars that you write about in the introduction because we have done recently a series of episodes around communication in a variety of different from a variety of different angles and with a number of guests from kind of all across the spectrum. And we've also just recently had an episode with Jen Schwanke about her book Trusted, about the topic of trust. So that has been a focus here. So it's trust, communication, connection, and we can take them one at a time. But I would love to know, one, is there a specific intentional ordering to those? Is there a reason why, right, they're listed in that order? And then how are you defining, let's start with the trust, that one, what that means, what it looks like, and what the status quo is, right? And what's taken to either maintain or disrupt the status quo of trust in schools.
Yeah, so we identify trust as the foundation. As a school leader, you really cannot move people, you really cannot move initiatives and programming unless you have the trust of the people that you're serving. That's why we did define and list trust as the number one factor. That's the first thing that we need as a part of this, one of the pillars, the foundational pillars. And again, trust really isn't about if you can do your job or not. We're all credentialed to do our job. We all earned our certificates to do this work. We've done the coursework, but that's not enough. Trust is more around, do people believe you to be someone of integrity? Do people believe that you will have their backs? And one of the things that I know I had to learn as a new leader, I really wanted to gain trust as quickly as possible. But gaining trust is a process. It's not something that necessarily happens overnight. And so, one of the things that we talk about in the book is what are some strategies that you can use to help trust in an effective way. And some of the things that we talk about are actively listening. So I'm someone who was new to my school this year as a principal, though I had been at my previous school as an administrator for 9 years. And one of the most effective ways that I was able to gain the trust of the people that I now serve is just listening, actively listening. So the beautiful thing about being new is you don't know people yet. So you have that opportunity to really sit and get to know people, find out where their strengths are, where they can best be utilized, and just bring a fresh lens on things. So trust is really important, and it is something that we can help develop with people over time. But the thing about trust is it can be broken, as you
Mhm.
know. And sometimes one mistake can put you right back on square one. So we also
Yeah.
talk about those trust deposits, the idea that you're depositing things, but if you do too many withdrawals, you're kind of back at square one. So we're asking leaders to really be mindful of how they're interacting. Are they taking the time to get to know people outside of their jobs? You know, we're all human beings, we're not robots, and neither are our staff. And so it's important to remember that people are people first, and it's important to connect in that special way with each person.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the trust deposits and withdrawals language because it is something that we did talk about in my conversation with Jen around it does feel like sometimes that the recovery time from something that damages trust can be greater or harder to come back from once you have earned trust, right? That if there's somebody who I haven't made my mind up about them yet, or I'm like not really sure if I trust them, and they do something that like makes me feel like, yeah, I probably shouldn't trust them. But then they start to do things to establish trust, like you start to change your mind pretty quickly, versus if there's somebody you really feel like you trust them and you have every reason to believe that, and then there's something that shakes that belief. It's hard to come back from that because it's making everybody around question themselves and question, was I wrong to trust this person, right? And it's almost less about even the leader in that case, or trust can go in multiple directions, but it
Yeah.
becomes more about, what was I foolish for
Yeah.
trusting this person? And another thing we talked about is there really is this, I would say, strain of kind of like trust resistance just culturally right
Hmm.
now in a lot of areas, right? Not skepticism. I have to learn to trust this person or institution, right? They have to earn it. I have to make sure that there's evidence there. And especially if I'm putting my career into somebody's hands and
Hmm.
we're responsible for important work here, I need to know that we can trust one another. But even just a almost a pride that's taken in not trusting it, or
Right.
in questioning and resisting kind of establishment, whatever that looks like. And so it can make it extra hard to earn that trust.
Yeah.
And it can almost make people look for that reason to close the door on it and say, you know
Hmm.
what, I have my one example here, I have a reason here. And it can be really hard. And at the same time, once you've earned it, I'm wondering, I would be really interested in your thoughts on how a leader can use trust to their advantage, right? Like not exclusively by looking at it as something to be gained and then maintained, but also to say, once we have a high trust level, how can we use that to our advantage
Yeah.
to get better outcomes, to get where we need to go?
Well, two things. I think one thing that I want to highlight is that trust is not words. Trust, people look for actions. People are always watching leaders. So that's why it's important that we show up, that we follow through on what we were saying, that we're honest, that we listen more than we speak, because those are good ways to build trust. But, when you're thinking more forward thinking, after you have gained the trust of the people that you're serving, you can move mountains. You can use that influence to then help build up other leaders and help build their capacity. Because one of the things about this role is no administrator can do powerful work on their own. You need to have the trust of the teachers and the staff in your buildings. And we need to relinquish control and show trust in other people. That's how trust grows. So, in our book, Brad and I talk about how micromanagement is a trust killer. If we're asking someone to do something or something that is going to help move our school forward, we need to give them latitude to do the work. We can check in with them, certainly, and we can support their work. But if we're really going to build the capacity of people around us, one of the ways we can do that is by trusting them to do some great work for our schools. So that's one of the ways that we can use our influence in a very positive way once we have gained the trust of those around us.
So that's a great transition to communication, because I do
Yeah.
think communication is a really effective way to convey trust and also to establish it. But of course, it has other objectives as well. Let's talk about that pillar.
Yeah, so we definitely identify communication as an extremely important pillar in relational intelligence. Communication is definitely a way that we can both express ourselves as leaders, but also communication is a two-way street, right? So one of the concepts that we talk about is it kind of a transactional communication or is it relational? And transactional communication is just kind of one way. I'm telling you something, I'm saying some important information to staff, and they are receiving it. But that is not the best way to communicate. Yes, there are times when we need to communicate in a transactional way, but the way that we make inroads with people is by listening and making sure that they also have a voice in the communication process. So we can achieve that in a lot of different ways, but definitely we again are lifting up active listening. That's really important. It's important. I'm a talker, so that's one thing that I know that I have gotten better with over time is just having that personal awareness that I really need to listen more than I speak. And that's something that I've done a lot in my first year in a new school because there's so much for me to learn. I do ask a lot of questions, not necessarily why do we do this, but certainly give me the context for this. How did this start? How long have we been doing it this way? Those sort of questions are really helpful. And then I get a better idea of the culture of the school and the beliefs in the community. So that's been extremely helpful just to be a listener in the process. And that's something sometimes we forget about. We think communication is just all talking, but a lot of
Mm.
it is listening and then acting upon that information in a productive way.
Yeah, and it can also be listening in the sense of asking yourself, like taking the time to ask yourself the questions about, okay, who is X information interesting to or important to? What questions would they have? What would they want to know about this? And what do I need to communicate about, right? Because I've long like believed that there's way too much in organizations of way too many things that they kind of categorize as like proprietary information, all right? That's kind of neat to know, or only leaders need to know this, blah, blah, blah. And also just way too little of bias toward transparency, a bias toward proactive communication and understanding like the emotional and relational benefits of communicating better, the productivity benefits, the ability, in this trust piece, in empowering others to do their work, that communicating clarity around the vision, the objectives, like how decisions are made in an organization and what works and why we do things, right? How it allows people to make better decisions in the work that they're doing and to improve their work and then to feel confident that they're putting effort into things that are going to lead to results. I think anybody who's been in the situation where they were trying to work on something they were asked to do with limited information and it inevitably led to, even if it wasn't a harsh criticism or anything, delivering it and being told, no, this isn't right. This is what isn't what I wanted, right? How
Right.
frustrating that is when it's like, well, you could have explained it better in the first place,
Yes.
or I would have done it differently if I knew this thing, right? When you're doing that over and over again, like, we could talk about the EQ, RQ piece. Even if you're very personable and you're not scolding, right, or punishing people for that, everybody wants to feel like effective in their job. They want to feel like what
Yeah.
they're doing is contributing to positive outcomes. And the more they feel like whatever I do here is just not exactly right, or it doesn't seem to be aligned with the organization, or it's not what the leader's looking for, it's making me feel like I'm not doing a job that is up to the caliber of what my ability level is. I
Mhm.
know that I'm capable of doing great work if I'm put in position to succeed, but if there's just not that communication piece going on, or I don't feel like I have an opportunity to communicate, and there's not
Right.
a mechanism for that to say, here's what I'm seeing, here's why I think this would be a good initiative for us or a nice thing for us to try. Communication is so important in, yeah, all those things that create the conditions for success. For the leader to communicate to all those other constituent and stakeholder communities, parents, students, all everybody else who the teachers are on the front lines of
Yes.
interacting with. And if they're not getting any kind of clear communication about what the school's goals are, why they have certain programs that they have, or what's happening there from the leader's perspective, and they're fielding a bunch of questions about it, or they're always feeling like they're in a position where they have to defend just what they're doing on their day to day. Again, it's like the emotional toll of that
Yes.
and the time spent on that is all detracting from their core goals of instruction.
Yeah. And what you mentioned is so important because all of what you just shared about really goes into morale, right? Teacher and staff morale. If a person doesn't feel like they are contributing, if a person doesn't feel like their strengths are meaningfully used, then they are going to leave. And we talk about that in the book. There's a quote that says, people don't leave places, they leave bad bosses. And we want to prevent that. So we can use communication to connect. We can use communication to foster that sense of belonging. It's as simple as taking a 5-minute walk, which is something that I do in the mornings, just walking throughout the building and taking unstructured time to ask people, how are you? How was your weekend? How's your pets, right? How are your kids doing? What's something you're excited about this weekend? All of those things are small conversations, but they do add up meaningfully because when you show that you care about people outside of the job, then you are fostering trust and you're using your communication skills to do that.
How about connection? How does that differ from communication? How does it build on these previous pillars?
Yeah, so communication is definitely related to both trust and communication. One of the things that we talk about is, how praise is so important in this job for reasons that you've already shared. This is a very, very stressful job. This is a job where if you don't know about education, you've heard about it, and it may not be the most positive things that are happening right now in press. And so connection is just all about making people feel valued, figuring out what their strengths are, how they can best be utilized. I know when I'm looking at teacher classes, because this is that time of year or the summertime when we're identifying teachers for students, I'm looking across and thinking about who's going to have the best connection with a particular student, because I know when we get that teacher match correctly for a child, then the year is just smooth. When families are happy, when students and teachers have a strong connection, so it's the same thing with school administrators. If teachers feel that they can trust us, that we communicate transparently, that we have their backs, they're going to stay connected with us, right? Year after year. I'm very thankful to be in a school that has very high morale and very low turnover. And that is not of my doing. Certainly, that is of the many principals before me who have created a very strong culture. But my role in coming in is to maintain that culture, and so connections are incredibly important. It's not something that can be overlooked. It's definitely not. People think about soft skills and are they as important? They are equally, if not more important. And that's really what our book emphasizes. Relational intelligence is something that is really, really needed right now, especially because of the state where we are in the field.
Yeah, it feels like all of these, to certainly some extent, I would say connection and trust in particular require require some ego mitigation, some piece of like you have to put that to the side and understand that it's about it's about both ends of the relationship, right? And of course, as any relationship is, but really, really that it doesn't matter how much intent or, you know, effort you put into establishing trust, into fostering connections, that if it's not working, that you may have to try something different, or in terms of connection, that sometimes it's subjective, and it's people just don't match up the same as another two people might, and it's not that there's any problem with either of them, but it's
Mhm.
just that some folks just don't feel like they connect in that way. Or I trust this leader. I trust that they operate with integrity, and that they make decisions based on the right factors, and that they are here for the right reasons. But I don't feel that comfortable opening up to them or connecting in other ways. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad leader to employee colleague relationship, but it might mean, what else can we do here? Who else is part of our leadership team? How else can we make sure that this person feels connected in the community, in the school here, so that they are engaged with their work. They know that they're supported. They know that there's an infrastructure for that. But that really would require saying, like, I need to take myself out of it and figure out what
Yeah.
works here, and not try to force the issue, or hold it against someone where it's like, yeah, there's just something that's not clicking, or they're more comfortable with somebody else.
Yeah, no, I like that you said that because that's the truth. There are definitely, again, number one, it takes time, but you're right. Sometimes there are some personality mixes that may or may not work, and that is a part of the process. But I think being very intentional as leaders and thinking about how can we do some two-way feedback. One of the things that I've done every year in my principalship is I send out an anonymous survey and I ask my staff to tell me feedback. How am I doing my job? What's going well? And what are my blind spots? And is there anything else that they want me to know? And I think people were initially shocked when I sent that out because most principals or administrators may not think to do that. And then there was a little bit of distrust, like, is Rachel going to figure out my response and what I said? And I said, it's a totally anonymous survey, and I would not be asking for feedback unless I plan to use it and do something with it. And so I ended up getting a lot of great feedback that was actionable. I sent an email to staff summarizing what was shared and what some of my next steps were going to be, particularly on areas where I had some blind spots and things that needed to be improved. And I think what came out of that was more trust. People had come up to me afterwards and said, we've never had a principal do this. Thank you. Right? Because that survey went out to my custodial staff, it went out to our secretaries, it went out to support staff, and it went to every single teacher in the building. And so everyone had an opportunity to share feedback. And some people said they weren't comfortable sharing it. Other people said, I will just tell you what my feedback is. So that was another nice thing, right? So we want to make sure that people have different modalities to share feedback. And I think that was a good way to build trust because I am saying to my staff, I'm not perfect. I'm a learner, and so are you, right? Because we're used to giving feedback as administrators, but typically we don't get feedback from the people that we're serving. So that's something that we recommend administrators try to do in our book.
Yeah. How do you measure the whatever the outcomes and goals are of strengthening relational intelligence, of having effective leadership in the school? Like, what are some of the ways that you feel that really benefits schools? What are some of the things you'd be looking at to say, we're making some progress on here, or these are the reasons, and especially why this is so important?
So our district actually does a school-wide morale survey for each individual school. So our teachers and staff all get that central survey, and then it's publicly put on a website for
Mhm.
everyone to see by school. So that is one of the metrics that we use. It's not the only metrics. I also use my own survey as a metric, but I also can look at the retention year over year. And so if I'm seeing high turnover in my schools, that is a data point for me to say, what can I do and how might I be influencing teachers, right? Exit interviews. Can we talk a little bit about why you are leaving or why you want to do a transfer. That's all important information for administrators. I'm thankful that we did not have many teachers turn over this year. We had two teachers turn over. That's it out of a staff of like 75 teachers. So we're confident in the work that we're doing, but there's always room for improvement in terms of building trust. But we can also look at metrics like absentee rates, right? So we can look at that. Those are measures of engagement as well. How many teachers are out on a daily basis? Because sometimes we do have teachers who need to take their personal days. But if you're seeing that a lot, then that's a data point to say, what can I do? If you're feeling overburdened, then what can we do on the school level to help support you better? So there are certainly lots of metrics that we can use to help determine if we have a good culture within our buildings.
Yeah. Would you say, I mean, what's job one of the school leader? Is it really focusing on that teacher, teacher growth and retention, like teacher effectiveness, teacher limiting turnover, keeping our folks here, helping them be successful? Is it smaller than that? Is it something else?
I mean, when I was a new leader, I focused a lot on students and I still do. But what I've come to learn over time is it is a focus on the adults in the building. When
Yeah.
we have teachers and staff members who are engaged, when we have teachers and staff members who want to jump in, when you have teachers and staff members who want to take on initiatives, who are willing to volunteer their time to support students and families, you want to keep that. You want to maintain that level of a strong culture. So for me, I know our students are well taken care of if I know our teachers and staff are well taken care of. So I have definitely done a shift over the years because again, we're always focused on our student outcomes. That is most important. But when we take it a step back, in order for our students to have the environment and positive learning experience that they need, our teachers and staff need that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. And I think obviously the goal of schools is student achievement and student outcomes. And yet, like, what are the steps that make that happen? And it only happens if teachers are effective. Teachers are more effective when they are happy, healthy, when they have experience, when they've been around, when students feel comfortable with them and they have relationships and they're not constantly turning over. And so that's again like creating the conditions to achieve the result of student success is we need to have a strong faculty and yes, a great instructional vision, a strong curriculum, right? All the other elements. But if they feel like they're either cut out of that process
Right.
because it's the leader is kind of looking past those teachers at the other side of the student outcomes and they feel either they're not consulted or their expertise is not valued or they're treated as interchangeable or
Mhm.
ultimately the thing that everybody's accountable for being those student results, but that again, like you can't be directly accountable for that. You can be directly
Yes.
accountable for the 10 things that make that happen, but there's no direct, okay, I'm just going to come in because that's only a result of how students actually learn and perform, right? And that's out of one's control, but all the other things potentially are. And it's an important thing to think about because I do think sometimes like organizations of all types can go too far in the direction of maybe oversimplifying or like this is our metric and then there's no formal accountability for all the things that are proven to do that where it's like if we focused on these things then everybody would be more successful at that piece
Yeah.
and whether that's the teaching in a school, whether it's sales, where if the only thing we pay attention to, what is the number? What number did we
Right.
hit? What did we do at the end? Well, like what are all the things that lead to that? Right? The number of meetings
Right.
that you have, your use of available materials, same thing that a teacher would do. How are we using the tools and materials that are provided? What's our implementation look like? What professional development are we actually engaging in it? Are we not? I mean, like if we do a good job of that, then we'll have better outcomes. But so it's important to think about. There's more than one job of the
Yes.
leader. It's like, where do we start? Like, what's the number one thing? If I do this thing really well, it makes the other things a lot easier.
Right. And these are shifts, right? So we know that leaders have great intent, but that's where our book is powerful because we're giving you powerful shifts that you can make that really do help to move the needle. And that's what you were just talked about. It's what are the shifts that we can make within our control that will help the overall outcomes that we're looking for. That's really important.
Yeah. How about the modeling piece of leadership and and how it relates to this? And again, taking it kind of a step further, and once we've established these pillars of the relationships, and we need to continue making progress toward everyone feeling comfortable and confident to have that measure of autonomy over their work, their life, right? How they manage and balance it. How important is that to think about, and what might that look like for a leader to model, whether it's the work life boundaries or other aspects? That is what we want everybody else to feel comfortable doing. Because again, like sometimes we can think as leaders, I'm telling people that they can do this, but I'm also not really showing it, right? And
Right.
even if I'm totally authentic and saying you do what you need to do, it might even be against your own comfort level, right?
Yeah.
But it's like I need to really show that it's okay. But how important is that?
I love this question because modeling is really important. And I think one of the things that we talk about in the book, and one of the things that I had to learn as well, when I was a new leader, I wanted to appear perfect. I wanted everyone to trust me because there would be a perception that I had it all together. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't have it all together. And there were some little cracks that kind of started to show in my leadership until I was forced one day to get vulnerable with the staff and to share how much I was struggling to keep up with the demands of the job. I was a new principal during COVID-19. And the first few years of my career as a principal were extremely hard. Those, I would say, the first 3 years. And I had no work-life balance. I was full on attached to my computer for probably 10 to 12 hours a day. And that is not an exaggeration. And that was one of the moments where I had to break that mold of perfection just a little bit to say that I was, number one, very tired. I was tired because I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't eating and I wasn't at my best. In fact, I was burning out. And we know that when leaders are burned out, our relationships suffer because we just do not have the time to be fully present with people. And so, one of the first things that I said to the staff was that I am going to give 100% of myself during my work hours. But when the work hours end, I am going to go home and spend time with my family. And that was a frank and honest and a vulnerable conversation that I had in front of the entire staff. And right after I said that, I got so many text messages from our teachers that said, "Thank you for saying that. I'm going to try to go home on time too." That created a new culture, a culture where teachers did not feel that they had to do everything under the sun before they were allowed to go home. No, you do what you are capable of doing during the workday, and then you go home, right? So
Mhm.
those were some shifts that were necessary. They were absolutely necessary as our school culture, continued to adjust. And that's part of what I learned about authenticity, that again, people don't connect with perfect leaders. They connect with authentic leaders. They connect with people who show a level of vulnerability. That doesn't mean that I'm crying every 5 minutes. That's not what I mean, because that can break trust. If people don't believe that you are confident enough to do the job, that will go in the other direction. But it will show that you are a human just like everybody else. And that's a way for people to connect with the leadership. And so I definitely believe in showing and modeling what we want people to do. But we have to also, again, they're watching actions, not just words. We have to walk that walk. And I know when the end of the day comes, I'm packing up my backpack. I'm tidying up things, but I feel good about the work that I do every day. And then I go home and I feel good
Yeah.
about my home life too. And that is really where we all need to be. We want to be good in school and good at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's actually a perfect ending point because we can we can model that here. We did a
Yes.
great job here, and now we'll go to the next thing. But before we leave, I want to give you a chance. Where can our listeners learn more? We will put the link below to where everyone can find the book. But is there anything else you want to point out for listeners to check out?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Ross, for having me on and giving us this opportunity to share more about our book, Relational Intelligence, the key factor to exceptional school leadership. It is out now. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Kindle and in hard copy. You can also find more information on teacher goals on our landing page. And we'll be doing some more content around this very important topic because, again, we do believe that leaders can make small intentional shifts to really become the best leaders for our teachers and staff and community and students that we can be.
Well, listeners, you can check out the book. You can find it on Amazon or wherever you like to get your books. We'll put the link there below and you can check out all the related resources, but a lot to learn here. And yeah, please check it out. Try some of these shifts or even think about one piece of this to start with and what that looks like in your practice, what you might try to take it that 1% better at a time and kind of approach these things that sometimes it sounds easy when we talk about it, but it's not, right? It's challenging. So taking it one piece at a time is helpful. And ultimately, when we're talking relationship, there's a lot of them, right? So it's not just doing one thing one way, it is figuring out ways that are effective to develop the variety of different relationships that are going to lead to success for your staff and students. So test it out. And Rachel, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.